It started with the laughter, not hers. That came later. But his. A nervous kind of chuckle that cracked in the back of his throat when he told his best friend, "She's meeting my parents this weekend." The friend raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for that?" "Absolutely," he replied. And he meant it. 6 months in, and it felt like longer. In the good way. Their love was fast but deep, easy but real. She laughed at his bad puns like they were Shakespearean wit. He admired her eyes like they were constellations. They made fun of reality shows together. They kissed like people in paintings. It was effortless. It was joy. But this wasn't about effortlessness anymore. It was about stepping forward. He took her hand on the drive out. She wore that soft blue sweater he liked, the one that matched the tiny flecks in her irises. He glanced at her. She smiled. And for a brief second, he imagined this was just the beginning of a future with in-laws, holidays, and awkward family group texts. He wasn't prepared for the reality. The dinner was fine. A little stiff, maybe, but manageable. His mother was warm, inquisitive. His father, the stoic, silver-haired man across the table, was courteous, almost too much so. Over dessert, the father patted him on the shoulder and asked for a walk. "Just us," he said, man to man. There was a chill in the air when they stepped outside. The garden lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows through the trees. His father didn't beat around the bush, didn't ask about his job, his plans, his feelings. He made an offer. "I'll give you $230,000, he said flatly, voice devoid of drama. "To disappear tonight. Leave her. No explanations. No goodbyes. No thunder, no threats, just a deal." The words didn't hit him all at once. They crawled into his ears, left a cold sting in his chest. At first he thought it was a joke, a twisted test of character. But his father didn't blink. He just stared, like a CEO making a business proposal. Like this was about stocks or real estate. Not a woman he loved. He could have yelled, could have thrown a punch, but he didn't. He just looked his father in the eye and said, "I'll think about it." He walked back into the house with a calm face and a shredded soul, smiled at her like nothing had happened, laughed when she asked why he took so long. But something had shifted. Not his feelings. Those were intact. What fractured was trust, not in her, but in the world. He had believed up to that moment that love was above price, that goodness had gravity, that justice, in small and large ways, existed. But what do you do when the father of the woman you adore tries to buy you out like a bad investment? He lay awake that night next to her. She curled into him like always. Her breath was soft on his neck, and all he could think was, "I'm in love with a woman whose father sees me as a transaction." He didn't sleep. The days that followed were quiet. They went on dates, shared playlists, cooked together. She was radiant, oblivious. He played the part well, but inside, something was growing. Not anger exactly, but a slow-burning disillusionment. He started to notice things. The way her phone always buzzed after she saw her father. The sudden awkward pauses in conversation when she brought up future plans. A dinner she canceled because her dad was in a mood. He didn't confront her. He couldn't. He didn't want to infect her world with his doubt. But the silence between them, once soft and intimate, now had sharp edges. The offer haunted him. It wasn't about the money. He could have laughed it off if it had been a test. But it wasn't. It was real. And that made it worse. Because it reduced their love, their laughter, their inside jokes, their plans for Italy in the spring, to a spreadsheet in a man's mind. One line item. He ran the scenario over and over. If he'd taken the money, would she have found out? Would she think he'd left because he didn't love her? And worse, would she believe it? He hated that he even had to ask those questions. He looked at her sometimes and felt sick with love, not because it was fading, but because it was being corroded from the outside, tainted by someone else's bitterness, someone else's fear of what she might become if she stayed with a man not like them. There's a peculiar kind of grief that comes with still being in love, but knowing the world around you doesn't believe it's worth keeping. He didn't cry, not then, but he did begin to keep a mental ledger, not of money, of cracks, a glance too long at his watch while she talked, a smile that didn't reach her eyes when she said her father wanted to see them again, a pause before answering, "Do you still love me?" Each one added a weight. Not on his love, but on the trust that love could survive this. Because what had broken that night wasn't the bond between two hearts. It was the belief that they were playing fair. They still shared the bed, still texted each other silly TikToks, still had Saturday pancakes and whispered conversations in the early dark. But he was watching now, not out of distrust, not yet, but out of something harder to name. It wasn't suspicion, but it wasn't peace either. His eyes followed her in quiet moments, looking for the edges of something she wasn't saying. It started with small things. She paused when he brought up her father. Her smile, once easy, started showing strain around the edges when the topic veered too close. The laugh that used to come effortlessly now sounded performed. Not fake exactly, just like someone pressing play instead of feeling it. And there was that one dinner, pasta night, like always. He asked if her father had mentioned their last visit. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She said, "Oh no, he's been busy. Work stuff," and then launched into a story about her coworker's cat. It was a good story. She told it well, but she didn't look at him while she told it. That night he lay in bed, his back to hers, eyes open in the dark. Does she know? The thought echoed louder with every small silence, every deflection, every flash of something unreadable in her gaze. He remembered her nervous laugh the next day after the dinner, how it hadn't reached her eyes, the way she kept scrolling through her phone, flipping through apps without really looking, and worst of all, the moment in the mirror. He walked in on her fixing her makeup. She didn't hear him at first. She was staring at herself, eyes blank, not sad, not thoughtful, just empty. When she noticed him, she jumped and smiled too quickly. "You scared me," she said. "Didn't mean to." She kissed him, light and quick, then walked out of the room. He stood there looking at her reflection still lingering in the mirror, that frozen, hollow version of her, and realized he didn't know what she had been thinking in that moment, or if she had been thinking about him at all. He didn't want to believe she knew. He told himself that 1,000 times. She wouldn't go along with it. Not her. Not the woman who once cried over a broken-winged bird, who left kind notes in his jacket pockets, who told him she'd never believed in love until him. But then, why the hesitation? Why the tension when he touched her wrist and said, "Do you ever think about that dinner with your dad?" She had blinked, laughed. "Babe, that was weeks ago. Why would I?" And then she changed the subject. Again, it didn't feel like evasion. It felt like fear. He wanted to believe that love was immune to corruption, that the two of them existed in a separate, purer world, above the rot that crept in through other people's decisions. But more and more, he felt like they were in a glass box, together but being watched, being judged, being pulled in opposite directions. One night, the truth almost broke free. They were lying on the couch, a movie playing, something light, forgettable. She had her head on his chest, hand resting over his heart. He didn't remember how they got to the topic. Something about trust, something about honesty. "I think," he said carefully, "that we underestimate how much people can hide." She didn't respond. "Sometimes," he continued, "I wonder if I could be living next to someone I love and not really know what they're thinking." A long pause. She sat up slowly, avoiding his eyes. "Why would you say that?" "No reason." But that wasn't true. The real reason was the deal, the offer, the unsaid bargain hovering in the space between them. He wondered sometimes if she had been told, if she had made peace with it, if she had decided, it's just the way things are. What if she wasn't choosing him anymore? What if she had made the same kind of quiet, strategic calculation his father had, and just didn't tell him? Maybe she's not lying, he thought. Maybe she's just adapting, and that was worse. Because if she had known, if she had chosen to let him stay, then their love wasn't a shared truth. It was a tolerated illusion, a pleasant script they kept performing because the alternative was silence. The next morning, she left for work early. No goodbye kiss, just the sound of the front door closing too gently, like she didn't want to wake him. But he was already awake. He lay there, hand across the empty sheet, and tried to summon the anger he should have felt. But what he felt was grief. Grief for something he couldn't name, something that hadn't left, but had somehow dimmed. He began replaying memories, her laughter in the rain, the way she traced circles on his shoulder as she fell asleep, the time she whispered, "I think you're my person," like a confession in the dark. Were those moments still real, or were they souvenirs? He couldn't tell anymore if he was fighting for their love or just fighting for the idea of it, for the version of her that existed before his father poisoned the waters. He looked around their apartment, the plants she'd insisted they buy, the mugs with little jokes on them, her shoes by the door. Everything looked the same, but the air felt different, charged, fragile, as if something was about to shatter. That night he didn't ask her anything. He cooked dinner, told her about his day, kissed her temple when she leaned into him, but in the silence between their words, his heart beat out the question he couldn't ask. Do you know? And worse, are you pretending not to? The man who had once believed in simple, steadfast love was now a man tiptoeing through suspicion, holding on to something he wasn't sure was real anymore. But letting go felt like admitting defeat. So he held on, even if it hurt, even if it broke him. Because sometimes, love isn't about what is. It's about what you want to believe it still could be. There's only so long a person can live in limbo. One evening, he stood by the window, long after she'd fallen asleep, watching the wind press against the glass like it was trying to get in and take something with it. He was done waiting. He couldn't carry the silence anymore. Not his father's, not hers, and not his own. So the next morning, as she stirred in bed, he said it. I need to talk to you. She blinked herself awake, bleary. What's wrong? He didn't answer immediately. He watched her face, how quickly her expression guarded itself like a castle raising its drawbridge. That was all the confirmation he needed. She knew. They sat across from each other on the couch. No breakfast, no music, just air thick with questions and fear. I want to ask you something, he said, voice even, and I want you to be honest. She nodded slowly. Did your father tell you? A beat. Her fingers tensed against her knee. She didn't ask, tell me what? Or feign confusion. That, too, was an answer. Yes, she whispered. Something inside him slumped. Like a wall he'd braced against finally gave out. But before he could say anything, she leaned forward, her voice breaking. But it wasn't what you think. He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in weeks, he saw not avoidance, not nervousness, but shame, real shame, and pain. She explained. The night after the dinner, her father came to her in private. He told her he'd spoken to him, that he'd offered money, that he had considered it. He told me you said you'd think about it, she said, eyes glassy. He made it sound like you were hesitating, that you didn't want to tell me, because you didn't know what you wanted. The ground tilted beneath him. He told you that? He asked quietly. She nodded. And you believed him? She flinched. I didn't want to, but you were acting strange, distant, quiet. I thought maybe he was right. He felt something twist in his chest, a betrayal wrapped in misunderstanding. All this time, he said, you thought I was considering it? I didn't know what to think, she said. I didn't want to push you away by accusing you, but I kept waiting for you to say something, anything. They stared at each other. Two people in love, both feeling lied to. But by who? Her father hadn't just made an offer. He'd planted a seed between them and watched it grow into suspicion. He could have screamed, could have said, you should have asked me. But hadn't he done the same? Hadn't he doubted her? Chosen to believe the silence instead of fighting for clarity? And that's when it hit him. The illusion hadn't just been theirs. It had been engineered by someone who didn't believe in love. She reached for his hand. I wanted to ask you so many times, but every time I tried, something in your eyes told me not to. He swallowed. That wasn't because I was guilty. It was because I thought you knew, that you accepted it, that you were okay pretending nothing had happened. She stared. Why would I be okay with that? Because you didn't ask. I didn't ask, she said, voice rising. Because I thought you didn't choose me. Silence again. Then he said it, the one truth that had been burning through him for weeks. I didn't explode at him. Not because I was tempted, but because something inside me broke. Not love, not even hope, but trust. Trust in the world, in people, in the idea that love was enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I thought we were both pretending, but now I see we were both hurting in the same silence. It could have ended there. Some couples don't come back from that kind of fracture. Two people pushed apart by the weight of their own assumptions. A love that died not by betrayal, but by the slow erosion of unspoken truths. But he looked at her now. no longer as the woman he adored, but as the person he had to choose all over again, with full knowledge, without illusion. And she looked at him, not as the man who might have left, but the man who stayed, even with a shattered compass. They sat in the raw aftermath of that confession, and for the first time in weeks, their hands met, not in routine, but in truth. "We can't go back," he said finally. "No," she agreed, "but maybe we can start again. Not the fantasy version, not the one our parents approve of, just us. Do we know what that looks like?" "I think," she said, her voice steadying, "it starts with saying the things we're most afraid to say, even if it breaks the spell." He exhaled, and for the first time it didn't feel like a sigh. It felt like release. Maybe that's what love is, at its truest, not the fairy tale. But what comes after the illusion breaks? When two people decide to stand, bleeding and bruised in the rubble, and ask each other, "Do you still want to try?" They didn't pretend it was all fine. After the confrontation, the house didn't suddenly fill with sunlight and music. The air was still heavy, and their silences still held ghosts. But something had shifted. They were no longer standing apart, watching each other from opposite cliffs. They were on the same side now, and they both knew if there was going to be a future, it would not be inherited. It would be built. They started small. One rule: no more assumptions. If something felt wrong, they would say it. No stewing, no polite avoidance, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. He found a therapist online, a warm woman with tired eyes and a no bullshit tone. They went together once a week. The first few sessions were awkward. She cried once. He shut down once. They left one session without speaking and spent the entire car ride staring out opposite windows. But the next week, they came back anyway, because now they understood something. Love wasn't the reward for compatibility. It was the reward for effort, for staying, for showing up after the silence. One night in the kitchen, half lit by the fridge light, late enough that the world outside was quiet, they sat together on the floor, backs against the cabinets. He was peeling an orange. She was sipping wine from a chipped mug. "I don't know who I was before," he said softly. "Before all this, I think I thought love meant ease." She nodded. "I thought I had to be perfect to keep it, that if I asked for too much, I'd scare you away." He looked at her, really looked, and whispered, "But I stayed." She reached for his hand. "And I didn't stop you." There was something in that moment, in the quiet honesty of it, that felt more intimate than any kiss. A week later, she pulled a brown ceramic pot out of the closet. Inside was a half-dead plant, a fiddly fig they'd bought early on when they were still collecting couples' things, a rug, matching mugs, little olive trees they didn't know how to care for. "I almost threw it away," she said, fingers brushing the brittle edges. "I thought it was already dead." He knelt beside her. "It's not, just neglected." They repotted it together. New soil, careful hands. The water ran slow, soaking into the roots like an apology. They put it by the window, not to forget the past, but to prove they were still choosing growth. It wasn't just a plant, it was them. Her father came again, not unannounced. He wasn't that foolish. He invited her to lunch, just the two of them. Said he wanted to talk things through. He still thought he could fix it, reframe it, regain control. She met him with shoulders square and eyes steady. "I know what you did," she said before he even opened the menu, "and I won't let you do it again." He blinked. "Sweetheart, you misunderstood." "No," she said, cutting through. "You offered to buy the man I love, and then you told me he was the one who hesitated." He tried to laugh. It didn't land. "I'm not your pawn," she said, louder now. "You don't get to move me around for appearances or ego. I make my own choices now." He said something about legacy. She said something about dignity. He left early. She paid the bill, and she didn't cry. They moved 2 months later. A new place, not far, just enough. The walls were pale gray, the kitchen small but bright. They brought only what they needed, and a few things they loved. New mugs, new sheets, the fig tree, now alive in the sunniest corner. The last box they unpacked held mismatched photo frames. One had a Polaroid, her eyes squinting mid-laugh, his mouth open like he'd just said something dumb. He stared at it. She caught his gaze. "What?" "Nothing. Just, this time, I know what we went through to earn that smile." She walked over, and rested her head against his shoulder. "We're not perfect," she murmured, "but we're honest now." He nodded and whispered what they had never really said before. "Not this way. I choose you." Still, she didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, and in that look, no pretense, no illusions, no script, he saw it. "I choose you too."